Alan Gaff, welcome to the Baseball Bookshelf.
Hi, Ron. Glad to be with you.
So, congratulations, a new book on Lou Gehrig, The Lost Memoir. Now, when someone thinks of a memoir, this is, it's not the anniversary, but there's a new book about Jim Bouton. And Jim Bouton set the tone for memoirs, broke the old rules for memoirs when he came out with Ball 4. Lou Gehrig's book harkens back to a much more innocent time. And I'm wondering, I'm sure things are going on in those days, just as they were in Jim Bouton's days, but players never spoke or wrote about it in public. How did you find the Lost Memoir?
Well, in 2005, I'd written a book published by Oklahoma University Press called The Lost Battalion of World War I. One of the officers was Leo Stromey. After the war, he became a prohibition agent in California. And doing some background research for my 2005 book, I discovered that he'd been involved in an illicit scheme to smuggle illicit alcohol into California. And I thought that would be an interesting story because there was also a member of that famous unit that lived in West Virginia and had been busted for making and selling moonshine. But his case had been thrown out because the judge found out he had been awarded a Distinguished Service Cross in the war and thought, well, I can't send a war hero to jail. So his case was tossed out, but they were in the middle of prosecuting Stromey when the best witness they had against him turned up mysteriously dead. So I thought, I could bookend a story here with Prohibition and a couple of war heroes. But while I was doing the research on Stromey's background, I came across the columns that Lou wrote under Following the Babe in the Oakland Tribune. And I thought, well, that's a lot more interesting than Leo Stromey. So one of the things I did was I contacted the Copyright Office in Washington, D.C., and found out that although there was a copyright insignia on the columns, they had never been copyrighted with the Copyright Office. So even though they had been done in 1927 and appeared to be in copyright, they were actually public domain. And I thought, oh, this is really good. So transcribed all of his columns, got in touch with Roger Williams, one of the best agents I've ever experienced, and convinced him that they were real because everybody's first impression was like, nah, that can't be true. That's too good to be true. Mm-hmm. So I convinced Roger, and then we contacted Simon & Schuster, and the same response there was, that's too good to be true, until I proved to them that, oh yeah, it is true, sent them copies of the columns and the letter from the Copyright Office, and ever since then it's been gung-ho forward.
So obviously, Lou Gehrig did not write this for the Oklahoma newspaper. These were syndicated columns spread out all over the country. But I imagine since baseball was not west of the Mississippi in those days, or west of St. Louis, this was an opportunity for people outside the major league towns to learn about their hero. And Lou Gehrig certainly was a hero to a lot of people. How did the syndication come to be?
Well, the syndication basically started when a man named Christy Walsh became the representative for Babe Ruth. And he began to make so much money for Babe Ruth that he decided that, well, I could represent a large number of people. So he started the Christy Walsh Syndicate. And essentially what it was he would employ ghostwriters to write for the athletes, and then all three of them would split the proceeds. Now, as far as Lou Gehrig's Following the Babe columns, I believe that Gehrig wrote them himself. The reason, there are two reasons, basically. If he had done it with a ghostwriter, the ghostwriter would have wanted payment immediately, so there would be an automatic turnaround. When Lou started, the newspaper promised that there would be one a day, but then the columns became more spread out. Some would take almost a week to appear. One disappeared completely. So it seemed as though, to me, that Lou was trying to do it himself, but found out that it wasn't as easy to be a writer as he thought it was. But then the other aspect of it is the writing itself. I started to count up the number of times that Lou used the word "and" to begin a sentence. And as I started to approach 100, I stopped because I was like, well, okay, obviously that's his style. Well, apparently Ford Frick helped him write the columns that are in the book about the the World Series. And that was essential because if you had a column that was late for the World Series, if it didn't appear in the paper the next day, it was worthless the following day. So he needed someone to help him with the columns for the World Series columns. But I believe that the bulk of the Following the Babe was done by Lou himself.
The stories that he told, again, there was a contentious relationship at some point between Gehrig and Babe Ruth, but reading the memoir part of this book, he doesn't really have a bad word to say about anybody. I can't see that selling these days.
Yeah, it was a different time, especially in sports. But yeah, you're right. And part of that was because of Lou's personality. Everyone liked him. He was a good guy. He's the guy you would want for a friend for the rest of your life. And he never really criticized anyone publicly until much later in his career. And I believe that's probably part of the fact that he was, well, a new guy. As a matter of fact, in 1927, the newspapers were recording the stats of what they called the Big Four, which was Babe Ruth, Tris Speaker, Rogers Hornsby, and Ty Cobb. But by the middle of the summer of 1927, they had expanded that to the Big Five by including Lou Gehrig. And here he is. This guy is 24 years old, and he's already being linked with these people who are all going to be in the Hall of Fame, all going to be baseball immortals. And it was a really big step for him. And I think part of the fact was he was just overawed by what he had accomplished and where he was. I mean, in his memoir, he writes about the first time he met Tris Speaker, and he was just overwhelmed by the fact that this was a guy he had idolized, and he acted like he was a kid that wanted to get a ball signed. He was just looking up to an idol and also playing against him. It's like a unique situation for someone.
So how did these columns come to be? Did he decide, I want to do this? Was he approached? Was it Christy Walsh's idea? How did this all come about?
I'm sure it was Christy Walsh's idea because it was another opportunity to capitalize on this new superstar, even though they didn't call them superstars back then. But I believe the way it ended up in the Oakland Tribune was Gehrig was overexposed in the New York press and all of the press basically east of the Mississippi where the major league teams were. So California was a new opportunity for sports baseball writing and sports in particular.
And this was a time when basically newspapers were, I mean, radio was coming into its own at that time, but this is pre-television days, certainly pre-cable sports in those days. So newspapers were, and maybe newsreels and movies were the only opportunity people outside of those major league areas had to see these superstars prior to what they were called superstars.
Yeah, exactly. The only way people on the West Coast could learn anything about baseball was through the press. There are no radio stations out there that would carry baseball games.
Mm-hmm. No superstations like we have now. So the memoir part is only half of the book. The rest is a biographical essay that you wrote. Now it's not a very thick book. It's not a complete biography. How did you decide what you wanted to say about Gehrig, considering what's been said in the past?
That was easy because the press told me I had a word limit. So
all right.
that choice was made for me. But I did a lot of research that never made it into the book, just because I love the topic so much. Matter of fact, when I started out doing this, I always referred to him as Lou Gehrig. By the time I was done, it was just plain Lou.
Now, living where you live in Indiana,
Right?
who do you follow as a team?
The Indianapolis Colts.
Ah, no. Baseball here. Baseball. This is the baseball bookshelf.
We have a minor league team here called the Fort Wayne Tin Caps. The
I love
name
the
comes from
names of minor league teams. They are so much fun.
the name comes from Johnny Appleseed, who was buried here in Fort Wayne, and he always supposedly walked around the frontier wearing a tin pot on his head. So that's where the team.
Well, a nice historical nod to the nation's past. Uh, did you enjoy doing this? Did it ever
I really
become
did.
a burden? Once you started, say, "Oh, this is a task. I got to sit down. I got to do this every day." Well, what's your writing process?
Well, I really did enjoy it because all of my preceding books have been on military history. And I like to tell people that this is the only book I've ever written where only one person dies.
Thank
So,
goodness. Unfortunately, but thank goodness.
but I really did enjoy writing about baseball. I enjoy research and I enjoy telling stories that haven't been told before. And I think I was able to do that in some of the references to material in my biographical essay.
Well,
Starting with, I identify the actual place where he was born. Other historians have not gotten it right. They assumed that he was born in the same place one of his siblings was born. But in the 1950s, his mother, the mayor of New York, and a bunch of other New York celebrities um, dedicated a sign, a plaque, something outside the building where he was born. So it's like from the very first sentence to the end of the book, where I have a chapter on Lou Gehrig's impact on World War II after his death. There's a lot of information in there that's not available other places.
tell us a little bit about that, his impact on World War II.
Well, everyone loved Lou Gehrig. Everybody was sorry to see him die. He was fervently anti-Nazi in his last years. And one of the things that stuck out to me that totally surprised me was there was a chance for people to vote on a Liberty ship that would carry the name of a prominent New Yorker. And they named it the SS Lou Gehrig, and he beat out other New Yorkers like Teddy Roosevelt and DeWitt Clinton and other prominent New Yorkers from history.
The name of the book is Lou Gehrig, The Lost Memoir. We've been talking with author Alan Gaff. Congratulations again. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's a good chance to see how writing was done back in those days as opposed to the bloggers we have now. So, Alan, thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, Ron.